The manor loomed silent under an unforgiving winter sky, as Eleanor Ashford stood before the locked drawer that held her past. For 3 months, she had been the Duchess of Ravensmere, bound to a man who knew nothing of the marks that traced her skin like a map of suffering. Tonight, that would change. The letter she had hidden, penned in her own trembling hand years ago, had vanished from its sanctuary. And in the study below, her husband sat reading words that would either destroy their fragile arrangement or forge something far more dangerous than convenience could ever allow. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has traveled. The winter of 1818 settled over Hampshire like a shroud, and with it came the inevitable collapse of the Ashford family fortunes. Eleanor stood at the window of Hartwell House, watching ice crystals form patterns on the glass, each one as intricate and fragile as the life she had built in the shadows of her elder sister's brilliance. At 23, she had grown accustomed to invisibility, a state she had cultivated with deliberate care since the summer of her 17th year, when everything had changed. "Eleanor, you must come downstairs." Her mother's voice carried up the stairwell, sharp with barely contained anxiety. "Lord Pemberton has arrived with the Duke of Ravensmere. They wish to speak with your father." The Duke of Ravensmere. Even his name carried weight in the drawing rooms of London, spoken with a mixture of reverence and speculation. Adrian Blackwell had inherited his title at the age of 16, following the tragic deaths of his parents in a carriage accident. Now 31, he remained unmarried, despite being one of the wealthiest peers in England, his northern estate sprawling across Yorkshire with a magnificence that made even the Prince Regent envious. Rumour suggested he had loved once, deeply and disastrously, and had sealed his heart behind walls no debutante could breach. Eleanor descended the stairs slowly, her hand trailing along the banister that had been polished by 3 generations of Ashford women. Her grey wool dress, high-necked and long-sleeved, despite the fire burning in every room, marked her as distinctly apart from her younger sister Beatrice, whose rose silk gown displayed the creamy perfection of unmarked skin. Beatrice, 19 and radiant, had been the obvious choice for any matrimonial negotiation. That Lord Pemberton had brought the Duke here at all suggested desperation on someone's part, though whose Eleanor could not yet determine. The drawing-room felt smaller with the Duke's presence in it. He stood by the fire, tall and severe in dark, superfine wool, his hair black as a raven's wing, and his eyes an unsettling shade of grey that seemed to catalogue everything they touched. When those eyes landed on Eleanor, she felt the assessment in them, not the appreciative gaze men sometimes gave Beatrice, but something more clinical, as though he were examining a horse he might purchase at Tattersall's. "Miss Eleanor Ashford." Lord Pemberton performed the introductions with the enthusiasm of a man who would rather be anywhere else. "May I present Adrian Blackwell, Duke of Ravensmere?" Eleanor curtsied, keeping her eyes lowered. "Your Grace." "Miss Ashford." His voice carried the clipped accent of the North, each syllable precisely formed. "I understand your father and I have matters to discuss." What followed was a negotiation conducted in euphemisms and careful silences. Sir William Ashford, once a man of considerable property, had invested poorly and gambled worse. Hartwell House itself was mortgaged to its foundations. Beatrice's dowry had been spent years ago on debts that only multiplied like weeds. Without intervention, the family would be reduced to genteel poverty within the year, dependent on the charity of relations who had already grown cold with each begging letter. The Duke's proposal, when it came, was startling in its directness. He required a wife, not for love, but for the appearance of stability it would provide as he navigated certain business ventures in Parliament. The lady would be well provided for, granted her own household, and given complete freedom in all matters except those touching on his public reputation. In exchange, she need only bear his name and appear at his side when society demanded it. There would be no expectation of affection, and no pretense of romance. It was, he stated plainly, a business arrangement. Sir William leaned forward, hope and shame warring on his weathered face. Beatrice would be honoured? "I am not offering for Miss Beatrice," the Duke interrupted, his gaze fixed on Eleanor with an intensity that made her skin prickle beneath her layers of fabric. "Miss Eleanor appears to be a woman of sense rather than sentiment. That is what this arrangement requires." The room fell silent except for the crack and pop of the fire. Eleanor felt her mother's shock, her father's confusion, and most acutely, Beatrice's wounded pride radiating from the settee where her sister sat rigid with disbelief. To be passed over for Eleanor, quiet, scarred Eleanor, who hid herself in libraries and avoided every social occasion, was an insult Beatrice would not easily forgive. "Your Grace," Eleanor found her voice, though it emerged quieter than she intended, "surely you would prefer—" "I prefer a woman who will not expect from me what I cannot give," he said, and for a moment something flickered behind those grey eyes, not warmth, but perhaps understanding. "You keep to yourself, Miss Ashford. You ask for little and expect less. These are qualities I value far more than beauty or charm." It should have been an insult, but Eleanor heard it for what it was, an acknowledgement that they were both damaged in ways society could not see. He knew nothing of her scars, of course. Those remained hidden beneath high collars and long sleeves, a secret she guarded more carefully than her life. But he recognized in her the same wariness he carried, the same determination to survive without revealing vulnerability. "May I have time to consider your offer?" Eleanor asked. "You have until tomorrow morning," the Duke replied. "I return to Yorkshire the day after. If you accept, we will marry by special license within the week. If you decline, I will trouble your family no further, and you may make what arrangements you can." He left then, Lord Pemberton trailing in his wake like a confused spaniel, leaving the Ashfords to fracture into accusation and despair. Beatrice fled to her room in tears. Their mother collapsed onto the sofa, overcome by the social catastrophe of having her younger, plainer daughter chosen over her diamond. Sir William poured himself brandy with shaking hands. Only Eleanor remained standing, her mind working through calculations that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with survival. Marriage to the Duke would save her family from ruin. It would provide her with independence, with resources, with a position from which she could never be dislodged by circumstance or cruelty. And if the Duke required a wife who would not pry into his sealed heart, well, Eleanor had her own secrets to guard. A marriage of mutual privacy might be exactly what they both needed. That night, she stood before her mirror and unwound the careful layers that hid her shame. The scars traced delicate, terrible patterns across her shoulders and upper arms, burns that had long since healed but would never fade, marks of a summer afternoon when she had learned that trust could be weaponized and innocence destroyed. She touched them lightly, remembering pain so intense it had lived beyond the body into the soul itself. No one knew the full story except Eleanor herself and the man who had caused them. She had written it all down once, in a letter addressed to no one, a confession she could not speak aloud, but needed to exist somewhere beyond the prison of her own mind. Tomorrow she would accept the Duke's offer. She would become the Duchess of Ravensmere, and she would guard her secrets as carefully as he guarded his. What could possibly go wrong in a marriage built on mutual silence? Everything, as it turned out. Absolutely everything. The ceremony took place in the private chapel at Ravensmere Abbey, on a morning when frost turned the Yorkshire landscape into something from a fairy tale. Eleanor had travelled north with only her lady's maid, Martha, leaving behind a family too conflicted to properly celebrate or mourn. Her mother had wept. Beatrice had not spoken to her at all. Her father had pressed her hand and whispered an apology that came too late to matter. Only Martha, who had been with Eleanor since childhood and knew more than most about that terrible summer, offered genuine support. "You're doing the right thing, miss," Martha had murmured as they packed Eleanor's modest trousseau. "His Grace may be cold, but he's honourable. That's more than most men can claim. The chapel itself was medieval, all stone and stained glass, beautiful in its severity. The Duke waited at the altar in charcoal grey, his face as expressionless as carved marble. No guests attended except Lord Pemberton, who served as witness, and the Duke's elderly chaplain, who performed the ceremony with brisk efficiency. There were no flowers, no music, no sentimentality. Eleanor spoke her vows in a steady voice, feeling the weight of the ring as the Duke slid it onto her finger, a band of gold, set with sapphires the colour of midnight. "You are now the Duchess of Ravensmere," he said quietly, and there was something in his tone that might have been reassurance. "Whatever you were before this moment is past. You begin again, today." If only that were true, Eleanor thought, but she nodded and took his arm as they walked back up the aisle. She was a duchess now, one of the highest-ranking women in England, and yet she felt no different, still the same frightened girl wearing armour made of silence. Ravensmere Abbey exceeded every description Eleanor had heard. The house sprawled across acres of carefully maintained grounds, its grey stone walls rising like a fortress against the wild moors beyond. Inside, it was a masterpiece of understated elegance, rich woods, tasteful artwork, comfortable furnishings that spoke of wealth worn so lightly it need not proclaim itself. The Duke gave her a tour that felt more like a property negotiation than a homecoming. "These are your rooms," he said, opening a door onto a suite that rivaled anything Eleanor had seen in London. A sitting room, bedroom and dressing room, all done in shades of cream and gold, with windows overlooking gardens that would be magnificent in spring. "You have complete privacy here. No one enters without your permission, including myself." "And your rooms?" Eleanor asked. "In the opposite wing." He gestured vaguely eastward. "We will take our meals separately, unless social obligation requires otherwise. You may ride, read, occupy yourself however you wish. The estate is yours to explore. I ask only that you inform my secretary if you plan to travel beyond the grounds, and that you appear at my side for certain events I will notify you of in advance." It was, Eleanor realized, less a marriage than a very generous form of house arrest. She should have been relieved. This was exactly what she had expected, what she had agreed to. Instead, she felt a strange hollowness, as though some part of her had hoped, despite everything, for something more. The first month passed in careful isolation. The Duke spent his days managing his estates and his evenings in his study, conducting business that required no Duchess involvement. Eleanor explored the Abbey, discovered a library that took her breath away, and began to establish routines that gave shape to her peculiar new existence. The servants treated her with respect, but kept their distance, clearly instructed not to intrude upon her privacy. Martha remained her only real companion, though even she seemed uncertain how to navigate this strange household. It was during the second month that Eleanor began to notice things that didn't align with the Duke's carefully maintained facade of indifference. Books appeared in her sitting room, volumes she had mentioned wanting to read in passing conversation at dinner. The head gardener sought her opinion on spring plantings, clearly at the Duke's instruction. When she expressed interest in learning to ride properly, a gentle mare appeared in the stables with a note, "For her Grace's use." The Duke himself remained distant, but not unkind. Their few interactions were marked by careful courtesy, conversations about weather and household matters that revealed nothing personal. Yet Eleanor caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she could not interpret, not desire, but something more complex, as though he were trying to solve a puzzle whose pieces didn't quite fit. It was late March when everything changed. Eleanor had been exploring the oldest part of the Abbey, the medieval section that predated most of the current structure. In a forgotten storage room, she discovered a trunk containing old correspondence and documents. Among them was a packet of letters tied with a faded ribbon addressed to Adrian in a feminine hand. She knew she should not read them, that they were clearly private, but curiosity overcame discretion. The letters were from a woman named Catherine, and they detailed a love affair that had ended in tragedy. Catherine's death from consumption, Adrian's grief that had hardened into the ice he now wore like armor. Eleanor was carefully replacing the letters when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned to find the Duke in the doorway, his face drained of color, his eyes fixed on the packet in her hands. "Those are private," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I know. I apologize, Your Grace. I should not have—" "No, you should not have." He crossed the room in 3 strides and took the letters from her, his hands shaking slightly. "These rooms are forbidden to you, Duchess. I would appreciate your adherence to that boundary." It was the first time he had shown any emotion beyond careful neutrality, and the rawness of it shocked Eleanor into silence. She watched as he turned and left, the letters clutched against his chest like a shield, and she understood then what she should have realized from the beginning. The Duke was not cold because he felt nothing. He was cold because he felt too much and could not survive otherwise. That evening, dinner was cancelled. The housekeeper informed Eleanor that His Grace was indisposed and would not be available. Eleanor retired to her rooms feeling guilty and strangely bereft. She had violated his privacy just as she feared he might one day violate hers. She had no right to his secrets when she guarded her own so carefully. She was preparing for bed when Martha entered her dressing room with unusual urgency. "Your Grace, I must tell you something. I've been hearing talk among the staff. They're concerned about His Grace. He's locked himself in his study with considerable brandy, and they fear he might do himself harm." Eleanor's blood ran cold. She thought of those letters, of the grief they contained, of a man who had learned to survive by burying his heart so deep even he could not reach it, and she thought of her own darkness. The nights after that terrible summer when she had contemplated escape from pain in its most permanent form. She knew that look in a person's eyes, the resignation that preceded despair. Without thinking, she threw a robe over her nightgown and hurried through the darkened corridors to the east wing. The Duke's study door was indeed locked, but Eleanor pounded on it with both fists, propriety abandoned. "Your Grace! Adrian, please open the door!" Silence. Then, finally, his voice, rough and slurred. "Go away, Eleanor." "I will not. I will stand here all night if necessary, and I will wake the entire household with my noise. Open this door immediately." More silence. Then the sound of a key turning, and the door swung open to reveal the Duke in shirt sleeves, his cravat undone, his hair disheveled, looking more human than she had ever seen him. The smell of brandy was overwhelming. His eyes, when they met hers, were red-rimmed and lost. "I read your letters," Eleanor said quietly. "I know about Catherine. I know you loved her, and that you lost her, and I am profoundly sorry for intruding on that sacred grief. But you must know, Adrian, you must know that locking yourself away with spirits and sorrow is not the answer to pain. I know because I have been there myself, in the darkness where death seems kinder than another day of breathing." He stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. "You? What could you possibly—" "I carry scars too," she whispered. "Not visible ones like yours, but they exist nonetheless. We are more alike than you realize, you and I. Both of us damaged, both of us hiding. But we are still here, still alive, and perhaps that means something. Perhaps we could help each other bear the weight of being survivors." Something cracked in his expression then, not breaking but opening, like ice beginning to thaw. He stepped back from the doorway, an invitation. Eleanor entered the study, and they talked until dawn touched the windows with grey light, sharing pieces of their respective darknesses, building something fragile but real between them. It was the beginning of everything, and the end of the carefully maintained lie that their marriage would remain merely convenient. Spring arrived at Ravensmere with an exuberance that seemed to mirror the subtle shifts in the Duke and Duchess's arrangement. After the night Eleanor had intervened in his study, something fundamental had changed between them. They began taking breakfast together, then gradually other meals. Conversations moved beyond weather and household management to books, politics, philosophy, subjects that revealed the keen intelligence both had been hiding behind their respective walls. The Duke proved to have a dry wit that caught Eleanor off guard and made her laugh, a sound so rare in the Abbey that the first time she produced it, several servants stopped in their tracks. "You should do that more often," Adrian said, watching her over his coffee cup with something approaching warmth in his grey eyes. "Laugh? It's hardly appropriate for a woman of my position," Eleanor replied, then realized she was teasing him, engaging in banter as though they were friends rather than contractual spouses. "I am the Duke of Ravensmere," he said with mock severity. "If I declare laughter appropriate, then by definition it becomes so. That is how ducal authority works, or so I've been told." They began riding together in the mornings, Eleanor on her gentle mare and Adrian on a temperamental black stallion that only he could manage. The Yorkshire moors were wild and beautiful in a way that called to something untamed in Eleanor's carefully controlled soul. She felt freer there, away from walls and expectations, with only the wind and the man riding beside her who was slowly becoming less of a stranger. It was during one of these rides that Adrian first asked about her past. They had dismounted to rest the horses by a stream, and Eleanor was trailing her fingers in the cold water when he spoke. "You mentioned having scars of your own," he said carefully. "Not visible ones. May I ask what you meant?" Eleanor's hand stilled. This was the moment she had both dreaded and anticipated, the moment when silence would either preserve their growing connection or destroy it. She took a breath and chose truth over safety. "When I was 17, I believed myself in love with a young man who visited our neighborhood that summer, Edmund Carstairs, second son of a baronet. He was charming, attentive, everything a naive girl might dream of. He spoke of marriage, of a future together, and I trusted him completely." She paused, feeling the old shame rise like bile. "He invited me to meet him at an abandoned gamekeeper's cottage on our estate. When I arrived, I found him there with 3 of his friends. They had been drinking. They thought it would be amusing to test my devotion, as Edmund phrased it." She heard Adrian's sharp intake of breath, but continued, needing to finish now that she had started. "They held me down, while Edmund used a heated poker from the fire to mark me. He said if I truly loved him, I would bear his brand. When I screamed, they laughed. When I fought, they held me tighter. By the time Martha found me, she had followed me out of concern. I had burns across my shoulders and arms, and my illusions about love lay in ashes alongside my trust." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor could not bring herself to look at Adrian, could not bear to see disgust or pity in his face. But then she felt his hand cover hers where it still rested against the cold stone. "Eleanor," his voice was rough with fury, barely contained. "Did the bastard face justice for what he did?" "No." The word was bitter on her tongue. "His father was powerful and mine was weak. Money changed hands. The Carstairs family left for the continent. I was sent to our country estate to recover, and when I returned, the story was that I had fallen ill with fever. No one spoke of it again, not even within my own family. I became the quiet daughter, the one who preferred shadows to sunlight, and everyone pretended not to notice." Adrian was quiet for a long moment, his thumb moving in small circles over her knuckles. When he finally spoke, his words surprised her. "I understand now why you accepted my proposal. You wanted control over your own fate, a position from which no one could hurt you again." "Yes," Eleanor whispered, "just as you wanted a wife who would not demand access to the parts of yourself you keep locked away. We made a bargain born of mutual damage. And yet," Adrian said slowly, "I find that bargain no longer satisfies me. These past weeks, knowing you, speaking with you, Eleanor, you are not at all what I expected. You are brilliant and brave, and far too interesting to be kept at arm's length like a piece of furniture that serves its function but inspires no feeling." Eleanor finally looked up at him, her heart beating strangely fast. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I would like to renegotiate the terms of our arrangement," he said. and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made him look younger, less guarded. "I would like for us to be friends at least. Perhaps in time something more, if you are willing." It was a request, not a demand. A question, not a command. And Eleanor realized that this was the first time in her life a man had asked for her consent rather than simply taking what he wanted. The difference was everything. "I would like that," she said softly. "Very much." They rode back to the Abbey in comfortable silence, but everything had shifted. That evening, Adrian asked if she would join him in the music room. He played piano, he confessed somewhat sheepishly, though he had not touched the instrument since Catherine's death. Eleanor sat and listened as he coaxed melody from the keys, rusty at first, but gradually remembering, his fingers finding confidence in the familiar patterns. When he finished, she applauded softly. "That was beautiful." "It has been 5 years," he said, staring at his hands as though they belonged to someone else. "I thought I had forgotten how." "Some things live too deep to be forgotten," Eleanor said. "They wait for us to be ready to reclaim them." Over the following weeks, they fell into new patterns, reading aloud to each other in the library, walking in the gardens as spring flowers began to bloom, discussing estate business, because Eleanor had a head for numbers that proved invaluable. Adrian introduced her to his tenants, who quickly grew to respect the new Duchess for her genuine interest in their welfare. Eleanor suggested improvements to the estate school, and Adrian implemented them without hesitation. It was during a dinner party hosted for the local gentry that Eleanor first realized how much she had grown to care for the man she had married out of necessity. Lady Thornbury, a widow known for her beauty and bold manners, spent the entire evening monopolizing Adrian's attention, touching his arm with practiced familiarity, laughing at his comments with exaggerated delight. Eleanor felt an unfamiliar sensation rise in her chest, not quite jealousy, but something adjacent to it, a possessiveness she had no right to feel. After the guests departed, she found Adrian in his study, reviewing correspondence. He looked up when she entered, his expression softening immediately. "You survived your first Ravensmere dinner party," he said with a smile. "I thought you handled the interrogation from the neighbourhood matrons with admirable grace." "Lady Thornbury seems quite fond of you," Eleanor said, aiming for casual and missing by a considerable margin. Adrian's smile turned knowing. "Amelia Thornbury is fond of every man with a title and fortune. She is also harmless and, I suspect, far less interested in me now that I have a wife." "A wife in name only," Eleanor pointed out. "Is that still what you want?" Adrian asked, setting down his pen and giving her his full attention. "For this to remain merely a name, a title, a convenient arrangement?" Eleanor's breath caught. They had been circling this question for weeks, each waiting for the other to speak first. Now here it was, laid bare between them like a challenge and an invitation combined. "No," she said quietly. "That is no longer what I want." Adrian rose from his desk and crossed to where she stood, stopping just close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Then what do you want, Eleanor?" "I want what I never thought I could have," she confessed. "I want a marriage that is real. I want to know you and be known by you completely. I want to trust again, even though it terrifies me. I want to believe that what we are building together is strong enough to bear the weight of our scars." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his hands. "I want that too, all of it. And Eleanor, I need you to know that I would never ever harm you. What was done to you was monstrous, and I swear on everything I hold sacred that you are safe with me." "I know," she whispered, and realized it was true. She did know, bone deep, that this man would die before he hurt her. When he kissed her, it was gentle and careful, a question answered with soft certainty. Eleanor felt something inside her chest crack open, letting light into places that had been dark for 6 years. This was what trust felt like. Not the naive faith of a 17-year-old girl, but the hard-won confidence of a woman who had learned to recognize honor when she found it. They spent the night together, and Eleanor showed Adrian her scars, not just the physical marks on her skin, but the invisible ones carved into her soul. He traced them with reverent fingers and kissed each one as though he could heal them with tenderness. And perhaps he could, Eleanor thought, as dawn broke over the moors. Perhaps healing was exactly this, being seen completely and loved regardless. But happiness, Eleanor would soon learn, was a fragile thing, and secrets had a way of surfacing at the worst possible moments. It was a bright morning in late May when disaster arrived, in the unassuming form of a travel-worn leather satchel. Adrian had gone to York on business, and Eleanor was overseeing the arrangement of the new schoolroom when Mrs. Hadley, the housekeeper, sought her out with an apologetic expression. "Your Grace, I hope I have not overstepped, but while organizing His Grace's study, he asked me to locate certain documents before his return. I discovered this caught behind a drawer in your sitting room writing desk. It appears to have fallen there some time ago." She held out a folded letter, sealed but never sent, bearing no address. Eleanor's heart stopped. She knew that handwriting. It was her own, shakier and younger, penned during the dark months after the attack when she had needed to purge her story onto paper or go mad from holding it inside. She had hidden it in her writing desk at Hartwell House, and it must have been transferred with her belongings when she moved north. She had thought it lost, had almost convinced herself it had never existed. "Thank you, Mrs. Hadley," Eleanor managed to say, taking the letter with fingers that trembled. "That will be all." Once alone, Eleanor broke the seal and read words she had written 6 years ago, a confession of everything Edmund Carstairs had done, every detail she had never spoken aloud, every moment of that terrible afternoon catalogued with painful precision. She had written it for herself, a way to acknowledge that it had happened, that it had been real and not some nightmare her mind had conjured. Reading it now was like watching her younger self bleed onto paper, and tears streamed down Eleanor's face as she relived horrors she had worked so hard to move beyond. She did not hear Adrian return early from York, did not hear his footsteps on the stairs or his approach to her sitting room. She only looked up when his voice, filled with concern, broke through her anguish. "Eleanor, what's wrong?" She tried to hide the letter, an instinct born of shame, but he was too quick. He took it gently from her hands, and before she could protest, began to read. Eleanor watched his face change as he absorbed the contents. Shock, giving way to fury so profound his entire body seemed to vibrate with it. When he finished, he looked at her with eyes that blazed with rage and something else, something protective and fierce. "This is what happened." His voice was barely controlled. "This is what that bastard did to you." "Yes," Eleanor whispered. "You wrote that you begged him to stop, that you told him you would do anything if he would just stop hurting you." Adrian's hands clenched around the letter, crumpling the paper. "And he laughed. He branded you like an animal, while his friends held you down and laughed." "Please, Adrian, I should never have written it. You should have shouted it from the rooftops," he interrupted, his voice harsh. "You should have burned down their house with them inside it. You should have—" He broke off, visibly struggling to contain the violence of his emotions. "Where is Edmund Carstairs now?" "I do not know. On the continent somewhere, I assume." "Then I will find him," Adrian said with deadly certainty. "I will find him, and I will end him for what he did to you." "No." Eleanor stood and took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Adrian, no. He is not worth your honor or your freedom. What happened to me was monstrous, but it is past. I have survived it. I have built a life beyond it. Seeking vengeance now would only give him power over our present and our future. He deserves to pay for what he did, perhaps, but I deserve peace more than I deserve revenge." Eleanor held his gaze steadily. "I need you here, with me, whole and free, not locked away in prison for murder, however justified. Please, Adrian, let it go." It took a long moment, but finally the rigid tension in his body eased slightly. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, as though he could protect her retroactively from pain long since endured. "I am so sorry," he murmured against her hair. "I am so sorry that happened to you, and that no one protected you, and that you have carried this alone for so long." I am not alone anymore, Eleanor said, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. I have you. They spent the rest of the day together, talking through everything the letter had revealed. Eleanor finally able to speak the words she had written in desperation 6 years ago. Adrian listened without judgment, asked questions with care, and gradually Eleanor felt the weight of her secret lift. It did not erase what had happened, but sharing it somehow made it bearable in a way it had never been when she carried it alone. That evening, Adrian burned the letter in the fireplace, and they watched the paper curl and blacken together. The past is ash, he said quietly. We build our future on new foundations. But the peace they had found was fragile, and fate had one more disruption in store. The next morning, a visitor arrived at Ravensmere Abbey unannounced, a tall, elegantly dressed woman with copper hair and sharp green eyes, who swept into the drawing room as though she owned it. Adrian, she said with a smile that did not reach her eyes, you have been quite the recluse these past months. I had to come see for myself what has been keeping you so occupied. Lydia, Adrian's voice had gone carefully neutral. This is unexpected, Lydia. The name meant nothing to Eleanor until Adrian performed the introductions with obvious reluctance. Eleanor, may I present Lady Lydia Carstairs, widow of Viscount Carstairs. Lydia, my wife, the Duchess of Ravensmere. Carstairs. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. The woman before her was connected to Edmund, his elder brother's widow, which meant she had almost certainly known about the attack, had perhaps even been part of the conspiracy of silence that had allowed Edmund to escape justice. How delightful, Lydia said, her eyes scanning Eleanor with undisguised assessment. I had heard Adrian had finally married, though the circumstances were rather mysterious. A sudden courtship, immediate marriage. One does wonder what inspired such haste. Love, Adrian said firmly, taking Eleanor's hand in a gesture clearly meant to establish boundaries. And that is all anyone needs to wonder about. But Lydia was not so easily dissuaded. Over tea, she dropped carefully placed comments designed to unsettle. Mentions of Edmund travelling through Italy, questions about whether Eleanor had family connections in Hampshire, observations about how much Adrian had changed since Catherine's death. Each comment a tiny blade, meant to draw blood through precision rather than force. Eleanor endured it with the same composure she had learned to deploy as armor, but inside she felt herself retreating to the familiar darkness of shame and fear. This woman knew. She must know what Edmund had done, must be here for some purpose beyond a simple social call. When Lydia finally departed, promising to return soon, as we are practically neighbours now, being family and all, Eleanor felt as though a predator had left the room, but only temporarily, soon to return and finish what it had started. She knows, Eleanor said quietly once they were alone, about what Edmund did to me. She must. I will not allow her to harm you, Adrian said, his jaw set in that determined way Eleanor had come to recognize. Whatever game she is playing, whatever she wants, I will not let her hurt you. But as Eleanor lay awake that night, listening to the wind howl across the moors, she could not shake the feeling that their carefully constructed happiness was about to be tested in ways neither of them had anticipated. Lydia Carstairs had not travelled to Yorkshire out of mere social obligation. She had come for a reason, and Eleanor feared that discovering what that reason was would cost them everything they had built together. The fragile trust between a duke and his duchess was about to face its greatest trial, and in the dark corners of Ravensmere Abbey, old secrets began to whisper of reckoning and revenge. Lydia Carstairs did not keep them waiting long. Within a week of her first visit, she returned to Ravensmere with an announcement that sent shockwaves through the carefully ordered life Eleanor and Adrian had constructed. She arrived during afternoon tea, uninvited but undeterred, sweeping into the drawing room with the confidence of someone who held all the cards in a game no one else knew they were playing. I have such delightful news, Lydia announced, settling herself on the settee with practiced grace. Edmund has returned to England. He is staying at Carstairs Hall, not more than 30 miles from here. I've taken the liberty of inviting him to dinner tomorrow evening. I knew you both would be thrilled to renew the acquaintance, Eleanor particularly, as I understand you were childhood neighbours in Hampshire." Eleanor's teacup rattled against its saucer. Adrian's hand found hers beneath the table, steady and grounding, but she could feel the fury radiating from him like heat from a forge. The audacity of the woman, bringing Edmund Carstairs within striking distance of the woman he had tortured, arranging a dinner party as though the past could be papered over with polite conversation and fine wine. "That will not be possible," Adrian said, his voice arctic. "The Duchess and I have no desire to entertain Mr. Carstairs." "How odd," Lydia replied, her smile sharpening. "I would have thought dear Eleanor would be eager to see Edmund again, given their history. Or perhaps that is precisely why you wish to avoid him. Tell me, Adrian, does your wife's past trouble you? Has she confessed all her youthful indiscretions, or do you remain blissfully ignorant of certain unfortunate incidents?" Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. This was the moment Lydia had been building toward, the revelation she intended to use as a weapon, a tool to destroy Eleanor's reputation and perhaps her marriage along with it. But before she could speak, Adrian stood, his composure fracturing into cold rage. "I know exactly what happened between my wife and your brother-in-law," he said, each word precisely enunciated. "I know that Edmund Carstairs is a monster who belongs in prison rather than society. And I know that you are complicit in protecting him, which makes you nearly as culpable as he is. You are no longer welcome in this house, Lady Carstairs. I trust you can see yourself out." Lydia's mask of civility slipped, revealing calculation beneath. "You think you know everything. You know only what Eleanor has chosen to tell you, her version of events, painted to garner your sympathy. But there are two sides to every story, Your Grace. Edmund tells quite a different tale, one in which your wife was a willing participant who cried assault only after her family discovered her indiscretion." "That is a lie." Eleanor found her voice, standing to face her tormentor directly. "I was 17 years old. I trusted him, and he repaid that trust with violence and degradation. He burned me, Lady Carstairs. He held a heated iron against my skin while I screamed, and he laughed while doing it. Those are facts, not versions or tales." "Facts you can prove how exactly?" Lydia countered. "You made no formal complaint. You accepted money from the Carstairs family in exchange for silence. By every legal and social measure, you were compensated for whatever alleged harm occurred. If you raise these accusations now, you will be the one society condemns, a scheming fortune hunter who trapped a duke with false victimhood." The threat hung in the air like poison. Adrian moved to Eleanor's side, his arm around her waist, presenting a united front. "If you attempt to spread such slander, I will destroy you," he said quietly. "I have resources and connections you cannot imagine, and I will use every single one to ensure that you and Edmund Carstairs are exposed for what you truly are. The only question is whether you wish to test my resolve." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Lydia's face. She had miscalculated, Eleanor realized, had assumed Adrian would balk at scandal, would choose social peace over his wife's honor. She had not anticipated that the Duke of Ravensmere loved his Duchess enough to risk everything in her defense. "You would invite such scrutiny to your house?" Lydia asked. "The investigations, the gossip, the stain on your precious family name?" "Without hesitation," Adrian replied. "My wife's honor is worth infinitely more than my reputation. Now leave, before I have you forcibly removed from my property." Lydia departed in a rustle of silken fury, but her final words echoed ominously in the drawing room. "This is not over. Edmund will have his say, and society will judge which of you is telling the truth. Prepare yourself, Duchess. The world is rarely kind to women who accuse powerful men of crimes they cannot prove." After she left, Eleanor collapsed into Adrian's arms, shaking with reaction and rage and fear. "She is right," Eleanor whispered. "If this becomes public, I will be the one society condemns. My family will be dragged through scandal. Your position, your business ventures, everything will be jeopardized because I could not keep my secrets buried." "Stop," Adrian said firmly, pulling back to look at her face. "Do not let that woman make you doubt yourself or us. What Edmund did to you was evil, and you are not responsible for the consequences of speaking truth. If society chooses to condemn you rather than him, then society is complicit in his crimes. But I will not allow that to happen. I will not allow anyone to harm you again." Over the following days, Adrian proved the depth of his commitment. He wrote to contacts in London, lords who owed him favours, magistrates who respected his judgment, influential women whose social power rivaled any man's. He quietly investigated the Carstairs family, unearthing debts and scandals that could be leveraged if necessary. He hired investigators to track Edmund's movements over the past 6 years, discovering a trail of questionable behavior with young women across Europe. Adrian was building a case, Eleanor realized, not for a court of law, but for the court of public opinion, preparing to defend her with every weapon at his disposal. It was Lord Pemberton, surprisingly, who provided the final piece they needed. He arrived at Ravensmere unannounced, apologetic and determined in equal measure. "Your Grace, I owe you and the Duchess an apology and perhaps some assistance," he said to Adrian, refusing to sit until he had spoken his piece. "I knew Edmund Carstairs 6 years ago. I was aware of certain incidents involving young women and his rather cruel sense of amusement. I said nothing because the Carstairs family was powerful and I was a coward. But I will not be silent now, not if speaking can prevent further harm. I am prepared to testify to Edmund's character, to provide documentation of complaints made against him in Europe, and to stand witness to the Duchess's credibility." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest. The first true breath since Lydia's visit. An ally, unexpected but genuine. Adrian clasped Pemberton's shoulder in gratitude. "You are a good man, Charles, thank you." Armed with Pemberton's support and Adrian's carefully gathered evidence, they prepared for the confrontation that seemed inevitable. It came sooner than expected, at a county assembly that Eleanor and Adrian attended to demonstrate that they would not be cowed into hiding. Edmund Carstairs was there, charming as ever, his golden hair and easy smile hiding the cruelty Eleanor knew lay beneath. When he approached them during the interval, Adrian stepped protectively between him and Eleanor. "Carstairs," Adrian said coldly. "Your Grace," Edmund replied with mock deference. "And Miss Ashford, I beg your pardon, the Duchess of Ravensmere now. How fortunes change, though I must say I am surprised to find you married to my old friend Eleanor. We have such history together, do we not?" "We have nothing together," Eleanor said, forcing herself to meet his eyes without flinching. "You are a coward and a villain, Mr. Carstairs, and if you approach me again, my husband will ensure you regret it." Edmund's smile turned nasty. "Such fire! I remember that spirit, though you were considerably more pliant when—" He never finished the sentence. Adrian's fist connected with Edmund's jaw with a crack that echoed through the assembly room, sending the younger man sprawling on the floor. The room fell silent, every eye fixed on the Duke of Ravensmere, standing over Edmund Carstairs, with murder in his eyes. "If you ever speak to or about my wife again, I will end you," Adrian said quietly. "That is not a threat. It is a promise." Lord Pemberton stepped forward then, his voice carrying clearly through the shocked silence. "I witnessed Mr. Carstairs assault a young woman in Vienna 3 years ago. I saw him use his family's influence to silence the victim. I have documentation of similar incidents in Rome and Paris. His Grace the Duke is entirely justified in his actions, and I will testify to that before any authority that asks." The crowd erupted in whispers. Edmund struggled to his feet, blood trickling from his split lip, his expression promising retribution. But Lydia Carstairs appeared at his side, her face pale with calculation, and whispered urgently in his ear. Whatever she said convinced him. He allowed himself to be led away, but not before throwing one last venomous glance at Eleanor. The scandal that followed was everything Eleanor had feared, and nothing like she had imagined. Society did not condemn her. Instead, other women began to speak, quietly at first and then with growing confidence, about Edmund Carstairs and his pattern of cruelty. Adrian's investigation had opened floodgates, and the Carstairs family found themselves drowning in accusations they could no longer pay to silence. Edmund fled back to the continent within a week, his reputation in ruins. Lydia withdrew to her late husband's estate, her social standing irreparably damaged by association. And Eleanor, who had spent 6 years believing herself stained by what had been done to her, found herself surrounded by support from unexpected quarters. Women who had survived similar violations, men who publicly stated that no true gentleman would blame a victim, and most importantly, a husband who stood beside her through every difficult moment, his love unwavering in the face of scandal and speculation. On the night the last of the Carstairs family left Yorkshire, Adrian found Eleanor on the terrace overlooking the gardens, watching stars emerge in the twilight sky. "It is over," he said quietly, taking her hand. "No," Eleanor replied, turning to face him with a smile. "It is only beginning. For the first time since I was 17 years old, I am free, truly free. And I choose to use that freedom to love you, Adrian Blackwell, with every scarred and healing part of my soul." He kissed her then, beneath the infinite stars, and Eleanor knew that she had finally found what she had stopped believing existed, a love that saw every broken piece of her and called her whole. Anyway, autumn arrived at Ravensmere Abbey with spectacular colour, the moors ablaze with heather and the gardens surrendering to gold and crimson. Eleanor stood at the window of the nursery, freshly prepared, hopefully occupied by spring, and marvelled at how much had changed in the 18 months since she had arrived in Yorkshire as a frightened bride seeking only safety. She had found so much more than that. She had found purpose, partnership, and a love that continued to surprise her with its depth and constancy. The scandal surrounding Edmund Carstairs had faded into memory, replaced by newer gossip and fresher intrigue. The Carstairs family had sold their estate and relocated permanently to Italy, where Edmund's behaviour would hopefully be someone else's problem. Lydia had remarried, a wealthy industrialist from Manchester who cared little for society's opinion, and removed herself from the sphere where Eleanor and Adrian moved. Occasionally, Eleanor heard whispers about other women coming forward with their own stories of Edmund's cruelty, and each time she felt a fierce satisfaction that speaking her truth had given others permission to speak theirs. But the true victory was not in Edmund's downfall. It was in the life she and Adrian had built together in the aftermath of conflict. Eleanor had become deeply involved in estate management, her facility with numbers and genuine concern for tenant welfare making her invaluable to Adrian's operations. She had established a school for the daughters of tenant farmers and estate workers, teaching them literacy and mathematics that would give them choices their mothers had never had. The Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere were known throughout Yorkshire for their progressive views and their genuine partnership, unusual in aristocratic circles where husbands and wives often led separate lives. On this particular autumn afternoon, Eleanor was reviewing applications for the teaching position at her school when Adrian entered the nursery, his expression a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "Your sister has written again," he said, waving a letter. "Beatrice wishes to visit for Christmas. She includes a lengthy apology for her behaviour following our engagement, and hopes you might forgive her youthful foolishness." Eleanor smiled. Beatrice had indeed been difficult initially, but time and maturity had softened her. She had made a respectable match the previous season, not a duke, but a baronet who adored her and seemed genuinely happy. The sisters had been rebuilding their relationship through correspondence, and Eleanor found she had missed Beatrice's liveliness more than she had realized. "Tell her she is welcome," Eleanor said, "and perhaps invite Mama and Papa as well. It is time for them to see that I am not merely surviving, but thriving. You are indeed thriving, Adrian said, crossing to where she sat and pulling her up into his arms. The schoolmistresses sent word that your student Agnes passed her examination with the highest marks they have ever recorded. The girl is brilliant, Eleanor, and she might never have had the chance to discover that without your school. Our school, Eleanor corrected gently. You are the one who funded it, who convinced the other landowners to support similar initiatives on their estates. We do this work together, Adrian. As we do everything, he agreed, kissing her forehead. Speaking of which, I have something to show you. Come. He led her outside, across the grounds to the old gamekeeper's cottage that had stood empty and unused for years. Eleanor had avoided it previously. Something about abandoned cottages made her think of that terrible summer day, even though this was not the same building. But as they approached, she saw that it had been transformed. The structure had been repaired, the windows replaced with gleaming glass, and a small sign hung beside the door. The Catherine and Eleanor House of Refuge. Eleanor turned to Adrian with tears in her eyes. What is this? A sanctuary, he said quietly, for women who need escape from violent situations, who require a safe place to heal and plan their futures. I thought Catherine would have wanted to help such women had she lived, and you have first-hand knowledge of what survival requires. Together, perhaps we can create something that honors both of your strengths. Eleanor could not speak for the emotion clogging her throat. To have her pain transformed into purpose, to have Adrian memorialize his lost love, not through grief, but through service. It was more than she had ever imagined possible. She threw her arms around his neck and held him fiercely. It is perfect, she whispered. Thank you. They spent the rest of the afternoon planning the refuge's operation, discussing staff requirements and funding mechanisms, and how to quietly spread word to those who might need such services. It was work that mattered, work that would directly counter the kind of cruelty Edmund Carstairs represented. Eleanor felt her scars, both visible and invisible, taking on new meaning. They were no longer just marks of trauma, but proof of survival. Evidence that darkness could be endured and even transformed into light. That evening, as they dressed for a dinner party at Lord Pemberton's estate, Charles had become a close friend, his loyalty during the scandal cementing a bond that went beyond social obligation. Eleanor caught Adrian watching her in the mirror with an expression of such profound contentment it stopped her breath. "What are you thinking?" she asked softly. "That I am the most fortunate man in England," he replied. "I married you out of convenience and found my soul's completion instead. You have made me remember how to live, Eleanor, how to feel and hope and love without fear that it will all be taken away. You have given me back my future, and you have given me back my past," Eleanor said, turning to face him, "not by erasing what happened, but by helping me see that I am so much more than the worst thing ever done to me. You taught me that scars are not shame, Adrian. They are proof of survival, and survival is worth celebrating." He crossed to her, taking both her hands in his. "I have something to ask you, and I want you to answer honestly, without considering my feelings." Eleanor's heart quickened. "Of course. Are you happy?" Adrian asked simply. "Not content, not managing, but genuinely happy. Because if there is anything I can do, anything you need to make your life more complete, you need only name it." Eleanor considered the question seriously, taking inventory of her life. She had meaningful work that engaged her mind and served her community. She had a home that felt truly hers, not just a place she occupied, but did not shape. She had friendships built on genuine respect rather than social obligation. She had a sister she was rebuilding connection with, parents she had learned to forgive if not fully trust. And most importantly, she had a partnership with a man who saw her completely, shadows and light, scars and strength, and loved the totality of who she was. "I am happy," she said, and realized with wonder that it was absolutely true. Profoundly, impossibly happy. 6 years ago I thought happiness was forever beyond my reach. But you proved me wrong, Adrian. You taught me that healing is possible, that trust can be rebuilt, and that love, real love, the kind that sees everything and stays anyway, is worth every risk required to find it. He kissed her then, deep and tender, and Eleanor felt the last remnants of the frightened girl she had been dissolve into the confident woman she had become. When they pulled apart, both were smiling. "We should leave for dinner," Adrian said reluctantly. "Charles will complain if we arrive late, and I cannot have my friend thinking marriage has made me irresponsible." "Marriage has made you human," Eleanor teased, "which is far more valuable than responsible." They took the carriage to Pemberton Hall, arriving fashionably late to find an intimate gathering of friends who had stood by them during difficult times. Lord Pemberton raised his glass in a toast. "To the Duke and Duchess of Ravensmere," he said warmly, "who have taught us all that true nobility lies not in title or fortune, but in character, courage, and the willingness to fight for what is right, even when the cost is high. May your example inspire us to be better than we were yesterday." The gathering echoed the toast, and Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. This was what victory looked like, not revenge against those who had harmed her, but a life built on principles that directly countered cruelty with compassion, silence with truth, and isolation with community. Edmund Carstairs had tried to destroy her, but she had taken the broken pieces of herself and forged them into something stronger than he could ever comprehend. Adrian came up behind her, his arms encircling her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder as they looked at their reflections together. "Beautiful," he murmured. "Every inch of you. Beautiful." "Scarred," Eleanor corrected gently. "Beautiful," he insisted. "Scarred and strong and absolutely beautiful. Never doubt that." And looking at herself through his eyes, seeing the woman she had become rather than the girl she had been, Eleanor finally believed him. She was beautiful, not despite her scars, but including them. They were proof that she had survived fire and emerged not destroyed, but refined, not weakened, but tempered into someone capable of both great love and fierce protection of others who suffered as she had. As they settled into bed, Eleanor curled against Adrian's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, the sound of safety, of home, of future unfolding with promise rather than dread. Outside, the autumn wind sang across the moors, wild and free. Inside, two damaged people who had found unexpected wholeness in each other drifted towards sleep, their breathing synchronizing, their dreams finally free of nightmares. The Duke had offered a marriage of convenience, and then he had found the secret letter that explained her scars. But in the reading and the revealing, in the choosing to stand together against darkness, they had discovered something far more valuable than convenience. They had found redemption, both his and hers, written not in letters but in the daily choice to love bravely, to trust completely, and to believe that every ending, no matter how painful, could become the beginning of something beautiful. And that, Eleanor thought as sleep claimed her, was the truest victory of all. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which part of the world you're listening from. I want to know how far it has traveled.